Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Saturday. Well, I thought we'd begin the program with Chuck Schumer. I don't normally do this because I don't want to turn most of you off. But we're going to begin with it because last week I read to you a speech he gave on September 10, 2015, on the floor of the Senate. A speech he gave announcing he would vote against the Obama nuclear deal. Why am I doing that? Oh, it'll make plenty of sense in just a few minutes. I'm going to let him speak without interruption because he makes such a great argument against the Obama nuclear deal. Here we go. Go.
I examined this deal in three parts: nuclear restrictions on Iran in the first 10 years, nuclear restrictions on Iran after 10 years, and non-nuclear components and consequences of the deal. And in each case, I didn't ask what is the ideal agreement. We're not in that world. I asked, are we better off with the agreement that we have before us or without it? In the first 10 years of the deal, there are serious weaknesses in the agreement. First, inspections are not anywhere, anytime. The potential delay of as many as 24 days before we can inspect undeclared suspicious sites is troubling. It is true that declared sites will be monitored. That is one of the positives of this deal. But if Iran is going to cheat, it will not be at a declared site with the eyes of the world watching. It will be at a non-designated site. And if Iran is trying to cheat, it will certainly delay the inspection process as long as possible. Even more troubling is the fact that the U.S. cannot demand inspections unilaterally. We require a majority of the 8-member Joint Commission. Assuming that China, Russia, Iran will not cooperate, inspections would require the votes of all 3 European members of the P5+1, as well as the EU representative. It is a reasonable fear. Once the Europeans become entangled in lucrative economic relations with Iran, they may not want to rock the boat by voting to allow inspections. We must evaluate how this deal would restrict Iran's nuclear development after 10 years. In my view, if Iran's true intent is to get a nuclear weapon, under this agreement, it simply must exercise patience. After 10 years, it can be very close to achieving that goal. Iran would be stronger financially, better able to advance a robust nuclear program. And unlike its current unsanctioned pursuit of a nuclear weapon, Iran's nuclear program would be codified in an agreement signed by the United States and other nations. Finally, we must consider the non-nuclear elements of the agreement. This aspect of the deal gives me the most pause. For years, Iran has used military force and terrorism to expand its influence in the Middle East, actively supporting military or terrorist actions in Israel, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and Gaza. Under this agreement, Iran would receive at least $50 billion in the future and would undoubtedly use some of that money to create even more trouble in the Middle East and perhaps beyond. The hardliners could use these funds to pursue an ICBM as soon as sanctions are lifted, and then augment their ICBM capabilities in 8 years after the ban on importing ballistic weaponry is lifted. Restrictions should have been put in place, limiting how Iran could use its new resources. Using the proponents' overall standard, not whether the agreement is ideal, but whether it's better to have it or not have it, it seems to me when it comes to the nuclear aspects of the agreement within 10 years, we might be slightly better off with it. However, when it comes to nuclear aspects after 10 years and non-nuclear aspects, we would be better off without it. Ultimately, in my view, whether one opposes or supports the resolution of disapproval depends on how one thinks Iran will behave under this agreement. Whether contact with the West and a decrease in economic and political isolation will soften Iran's hardline positions, or whether the current autocratic regime views this deal as a way to get relief from onerous sanctions while still retaining their designs on nuclear arms and regional hegemony. To me, the very real risk that Iran will not moderate and will instead use the agreement to pursue its nefarious goals is too great. Therefore, I will vote to disapprove the agreement.
I don't think I could have said that better myself. Absolutely not. Now, that said, obviously he was right back then, and obviously President Trump was right to rip up that deal. It was a disaster. And we have to make sure when we negotiate that we're not negotiating a deal, but a surrender. So Chuck Schumer was right back then, yet he has completely reversed course today. He's no longer a serious or credible individual, and neither is his party serious or credible. In fact, the Democrat Party, its surrogates, and the media all are feverishly looking for ways to derail and sabotage our military operation against Iran. Schumer knew, and they all knew, that it would eventually have to come down to something like this. It's just that Donald Trump had the guts to deal with it. In other words, this cabal is not only against our military action, but are actively trying to gut it. In addition to claims that the war is illegal and unconstitutional, it's neither, and claims that the threat from the Iranian regime is not imminent, which of course it is and it was, that's nonsense. But their actions and public comments, Schumer and the others, are giving aid and comfort to the enemy and ensuring that the enemy is more likely to dig in than not, and dig in more than ever. Incredibly, Democrats and their ilk are declaring that if they win the House in November, one of their top duties would be to impeach the President of the United States. And they're repeatedly insisting that the 25th Amendment, that they don't even understand, should be triggered. So they want to remove a sitting president, the commander-in-chief, in the middle of a war or after a war, because they disagree with him. And of course, that is not and never has been the standard for impeachment or triggering the 25th Amendment. Then there are the woke Reich neo-fascists who view America much as the Marxist Islamists do. That is, we're an imperial power, you see, responsible for forever wars and wars of choice. These people are largely on the internet, they're largely podcasters, albeit not exclusively, and they peddle conspiracy theories that include blaming the Jews and Israel and Netanyahu for dragging this president and the whole cabinet and our Pentagon into war. They say these things despite the fact that Iran has attacked us dozens and dozens of times since 1979, killing thousands of Americans, military and citizen, and which had nothing to do with Israel or the Jews. This bigotry is also stoked by Marxists and Islamists who now form part of the base of the Democrat Party, and they've elected members to Congress in the Democrat Party, and they've got more running, just in case we don't have enough, as well as foreign governments with their PSYOP operations in this country and the fortunes that they pour into it right here in America. Qatar, Iran, China, and others. The American media give voice to all of this and then add their own manipulating news coverage, promoting opponents to the war and censoring military successes. There are also radical isolationists serving in government positions, constantly leaking to the press for the purpose of undermining the military operation and the commander-in-chief and spreading the lies about Israel and the Prime Minister of Israel controlling American foreign policy. One of the issues that you've been hearing repeatedly is the price of gasoline. Since when have the Democrats cared about the price of gasoline? They tell you how it's gone up. What you're not told is that the average price of gasoline today, and I just checked, is $4 a gallon. Under Biden, the highest average price was $5.11. Biden intentionally drove up the price of energy across the board in the name of climate change. The media and the Democrats were fine with that. They never said a damn thing about it. And the increase to $4 a gallon today is temporary because the president has reversed all of the Biden regime's degrowth policies with growth policies. We are energy independent again. But propaganda is propaganda, and repetition of propaganda is a powerful tool for thought control. Now, the military operation against Iran could not be going better. Simply put, the Iranian military no longer exists as a potent threat. Period. Now, of course, they still have the means to launch missiles in the cities and civilian areas all across the region. They are into Israel as well as Arab states. But they're unable to conquer any of the other countries in the region. The United States military, working with the Israeli military, they have fought a nearly perfect war at every level. Now, I know the opposition in our country refuse to acknowledge this because they are shamelessly rooting for the enemy. That's right. Shamelessly rooting for the enemy because they're looking for the opportunities to exploit the military operation for political and ideological reasons. But there are two crucial issues that need to draw our immediate attention. First, what does a real victory look like? I read today that our intelligence agencies have concluded that China is shipping air defense systems to Iran, and they will arrive within 2 weeks. And this underscores the issue, the ideological and political resilience of the Iranian regime. That's what has to be destroyed too. The fact that many in leadership positions have been eliminated, well, that's critically important, but it's not enough. The leadership is constantly replenished, and decision-making mechanisms of the regime regenerate. There is a distinction between a military victory and a strategic victory. And in my view, we need both. Both. To be very clear, this is not a failure of our military mission, our planning, our military leaders, the president, his cabinet, and so forth. It just has not happened yet. It takes more than 40 days. It takes a little bit more time. This is complicated by the cessation of the military operation as we undertake negotiations. But time buys the enemy strategic advantages, but complicates our ultimate objectives, in my opinion. The most important of which is the collapse of the Iranian regime. Because if it doesn't collapse, then what happens 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 15 years from now? I believe these discussions that are taking place and have been taking place need to be more about the terms of surrender than anything else. Now, if we stay the course, including militarily, the chances of the regime collapsing very high, especially if we also focus on key economic sectors where they have dual use. That is how we have fought wars in the past where we've been victorious. This is how past American wars have been won. Now, if we do not, the essence of the regime will survive in one form or another. In one form or another. This is why more recent wars have not resulted in real victories. We don't want a forever war. We want to end this thing. Now, if the latter path is chosen, then the question becomes, how do we trust a terrorist regime obsessed with blowing our nation off the face of the earth and which is supported financially, militarily, and strategically by China, as you just saw, Russia, North Korea? How do we trust them to honor an agreement when, in fact, it has never honored any agreement in half a century? As I mentioned here a month or more ago, North Korea played this game and now has 50 nuclear missiles and is building 7 more every single year. Meanwhile, South Korea has denuked because we agreed to take our nukes out of South Korea. But if this is the chosen path, we must ensure it is honored by a dishonorable bunch of mass murderers. Thus far, neither we nor the rest of the world has found a way to do that. Maybe we will. I'm skeptical, but I'm open-minded. And what makes the Iranian regime even worse is that it's built on an ideology that links a death cult, religious fanaticism, and fundamentalism dating back to the 7th century with a deadly, serious, strategic objective of acquiring the means by which to carry out its mass destruction and genocide. Why else would it want these weapons? For them, negotiations are a means to those ends. They will play the role of serious negotiators, going back and forth, knowing full well that to them, it's a minor bump in the road. And ultimately, to them, it means nothing. It means nothing. Again, this should be more about surrender, the terms of surrender than not. Now remember, I said there's two issues. The second issue involves us, we the people. What are we prepared to support? Now, the vast majority of us do not directly feel any negative impact from this military operation like past generations of Americans have, other than a temporary increase in a gallon of gasoline, an increase that is lower than the increase during the Biden regime over climate change. We don't have a draft, so those in the military chose voluntarily to be in the military. Unlike prior generations, there really is no significant sacrifice for us, if you really think about it. Certainly not at the level, as I said, of our parents and grandparents that they experienced. Yet I sense even beyond those individuals and groups I discussed earlier who are trying to sabotage us, some skepticism, maybe some wariness among some of our fellow Americans. I don't believe it's widespread. I certainly don't believe it's fever-pitched, even though the left and the woke right are trying to create that environment. But it requires our attention. And for this, I turn to Winston Churchill, whose prescience about Hitler and the Nazis and his repeated warnings resulted in his banishment to what he called the wilderness years from 1929 to 39. In one of his most famous speeches during that period, he said, "The culminating question is whether the world as we have known it, the great and hopeful world of before the war, the world of increasing hope and enjoyment for the common man, the world of honored tradition and expanding science, should meet this menace by submission or by resistance." People say we ought not to allow ourselves to be drawn into a theoretical antagonism between Nazism and democracy. But the antagonism is here now. It is this very conflict of spiritual and moral ideas which gives the free countries a great part of their strength. President Trump deserves enormous credit for his prescience, courage, and determination in making one of the great decisions of any presidency. He did what 7 presidents before him refused to do, not because it was wrong, but because it was hard. Carter ushered in the Iranian Nazi regime. Obama bowed to it, agreeing to pave the way to it, obtaining nuclear weapons. And Biden funded it, which was worse than appeasement. We were lulled into believing that this would buy us peace, that the Iranian regime would relent, that we had nothing to fear, but there was no peace. They did not relent, and we had much to fear from its nuclear obsession. And our president, who for decades declared that Iran must never get a nuclear weapon, took bold action. The president was also moved to action by what he saw in January, what the entire world saw, the mass slaughter of tens of thousands of young people in the streets of Iran for daring to peacefully march for their freedom, the executions, torture, rape, the carnage, the butchery, the bloodbath. The president warned the killers that they would pay a price, and they must pay a price. Bold action should continue. If not now, it will have to surely later. Experience, history, and reality tell us so. And in the end, we Americans, we unite, we rally. We've been underestimated before to the great detriment of those who really don't know who we are. And that goes for cheap politicians and media propagandists in our own country and murderous regimes and thugs overseas. I'll end this way. In his pamphlet, The American Crisis, Thomas Paine said this: "Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigues of supporting it." Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigues of supporting it. We, Mr. and Mrs. America, we can unite, rally, and support this effort. I'll be right back.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.